Hi, this is Rabbi Dov Fischer of Youngesville of Orange County, and I'm here to speak about Parshas Bahar B'chukosai, combined Parsha, with a focus on Parashat Hey of towards the end of Parshas Bahar. As the Parsha winds down, that is Bahar, we are commanded never to charge or accept interest on loans. Pasuk Lamed Hey, Lamed Vav, Lamed Zayin. By contrast, we may accept dividends on investments. This Torah commandment is extraordinarily compassionate, even as it laid a groundwork for one of the worst avenues of Jew hatred to dominate the past 2,000 years under Christendom. First, in terms of compassion and practicality, contemporary commercial realities that see usurious credit card interest rates that can reach 20% and even 30% annually often drive the financially hard-pressed into a downward spiral from which they never can recover. A person whose income already leaves him unable to meet his costs, prompting him, often irresponsibly, to live off his credit cards, eventually reaches a point where he maxes out. And then he faces Judgment Day, unable ever to dig himself out of debts at 20 to 30%. And how's he going to get out of it? It's a catch-22. As banks seek to protect themselves and their bottom lines by charging usurious rates to offset the losses they incur when other credit card debtors evade their responsibilities by discharging them in bankruptcy. So you have the very strategy the banks use to compensate for what they're losing, often induces even more debtors to file under Chapter 7 of the Bankruptcy Code, because at those exorbitant rates, those people realize they never will get out from under. Now, the Torah approaches the matter differently, barring lenders from charging interest to their fellows, forcing them to be circumspect before lending and to regard lending as a charitable venture, not a commercial one. Even so, commerce relies on lending. Manufacturers need capital to expand facilities, to purchase equipment and supplies, to advertise and broaden markets, to conduct research and development, to employ personnel, and so much more. If they may not borrow on interest, and if those with capital may not lend on interest, commerce is frozen because lenders will not risk their assets by lending profit-free to borrowers who may lose some or all the borrowed assets. So, thus, the Torah permits investing and receiving dividends on those investments. In practical terms, when lenders want to lend for profit and borrowers are willing to pay for the value of that money, Jewish law permits the parties to enter into a so-called heter iska, a commercial permit, a transactional agreement by which the loan is deemed an investment and the borrower's additional remittance to the lender beyond the repayment of principal is deemed not interest, but a reimbursement for the lost opportunity cost sustained by the lender who could not otherwise use that same lent money for other commercially profitable investments or business programs. Alas, historically, the laws barring Jews from lending on interest to other Jews opened the door for the worst anti-Semitic canards that have dogged Jews from 2,000 years under Christian European domination. Torah says, if your brother falls into deep financial straits, you shall strengthen him. Do not exact interest or increase repayment, Neshekh Marbis, from him, and you shall fear your God. Let your brother live with you. Do not give him your money on interest, nor give your food at increased repayment. So in the Middle Ages, during the era of the Holy Roman Emperor, Christian Europe was deeply religious and Bible faithful too. Popes ruled mightily and could close down an entire European country with an interdict, withdrawing holy sacraments and even denying religious burial rights and rights to those in defiance. So what happened? This extraordinarily dominating role of religion in medieval Europe lay at the basis of so much conflict in the Middle Ages, including but not limited to horrifically bloody and endless wars between Roman Catholics and Protestants. The conflict over marital annulment that led Henry VIII of England to break down from Roman Catholicism, break away from that religion, and create a new denomination, Anglicanism, and the Spanish Inquisition, in fact, which all came out of that. One side effect of Christian Europe's heavy biblical fidelity in those times was the way that the Christians interpreted Sefer Vayikra, Parak our psukim Lamed Hey to Lamed Zayin, whereas Jews understood the commandment to bar a Jew from lending on interest to a fellow Jew, your brother, Achicha, but permitted lending on interest to non-Jews. The church understood that you're not allowed as Christians to lend on interest to other Christians, your brother, but you may borrow an interest from Jews. Inasmuch as the halacha permitted Jews to lend on interest to Christians, and since the church read the Old Testament, as they called it, to permit Christians to borrow from Jews on interest, a perfect match. They're not allowed to lend on interest to fellow Christians. The only way that growing and expanding international commerce could reach its fullest potential was by having Jews lend on interest to Christians. We could lend to them, but their own couldn't. They could borrow from us. There also are practical advantages in having Jews as the international money lenders. European countries were in constant bitter conflict and war. Just a glimpse at Shakespeare's literary output reflects the many wars between England and France. Catholic countries had issues with Germany and Martin Luther and his Reformation. Shifting alliances and royal marriages of convenience assured constant instability and conflagration. In that environment, in the event of a business dispute over a massive commercial amount, say between a British lender and a French borrower, there was great difficulty in adjudicating the contract dispute impartially. The British court would take the British lender's side. The French court would bend toward the French borrower. They did not have justice, and they knew it. Ironically, therefore, Jewish lenders were preferred by both sides because Jews faced massacres and pogroms throughout Europe and had enormous motivation to avoid unnecessary intramural rifts. So if the Jew was representing the British borrower and the French lender or the other way around, the Jew's not looking to get into a fight with the other Jew. Consequently, in a dispute between two Jewish litigants, one French and one British, representing their respective lender and borrower, it was known among the Goyim, the Christian borrowers, that the Jews would bring the case to a Beis Din, a Jewish court of law, that would rule based on neutral, Talmudic, and other Jewish commercial laws, Choshen Mishpat, instead of the British law, the French law. As a result, it was felt that contracts with Jews were more likely to be honored mutually and that disputes would more likely be adjudicated fully. In addition, a Jew in France and a Jew in Britain were thought to share more in common: Hebrew language, or they didn't speak Yiddish so much then, common legal principles, way of life, a shared need to survive in a violently anti-Jewish medieval Christian world. Then say a British Protestant and a French Catholic. Consequently, Jews were deemed ideal money lenders to expand European commerce. The problem, of course, is that Jews perceive the peril in playing the role of moneylender. Christian Jew haters might abrogate their contracts and refuse to honor their obligations. In domestic litigations between a Jew and a Christian in a Christian European court, the Jew could hardly expect justice. The vicious, insidious more Judaico saw an horrific courtroom oath imposed on any Jewish litigant or witness, further deterring Jews from desiring to lend money to Christian borrowers, entrepreneurs. As a matter of human nature, people tend to love their money lenders on the day that the loan is approved, but then they revert to despising the money lender afterward as repayment time comes. Jews often tried to avoid the lending role. They knew what it would get them. But Christian European governments actually coerced wealthy Jews to lend to Christian borrowers on interest, because the Christians couldn't lend because they believed the Bible didn't. So as a result, the stereotype of the hated Jewish moneylender, the Shylock, as epitomized in Shakespeare's Merchant of Venice. Over time, the stereotype grew and expanded to a more universal image of the cheap Jew, whose life focus is money, always looks for a bargain and always dickers. Indeed, the Oxford English Dictionary even defined Jew as a verb, to Jew someone down. The irony, of course, is that a labor sale in Goyish, Idaho, where there's like no Jews, all right, or a President's Day sale in West Virginia, or a Black Friday post-Thanksgiving sale in Alabama, those are not aimed at Jews, but at bargain hunters among non-Jews, who by the tens of thousands also are looking to save a buck. No one normal likes throwing away money, and every day of the year there are sales aimed at non-Jews. Sales at the supermarket or pharmacy, buy two and get one free, or sales at the clothier, buy 3 suits and 2 shirts and get a free tie. Sales at the sports events, first 3,000 people get a free bobblehead of the team star player or a free bat. Negotiations, ongoing dickering, of course. Pervert automobile lots. When a guy buys a car, they don't try to save money and negotiate. When people buy cars, when most cars in America purchased by non-Jews, who negotiate down the sticker price, and so on and so forth. And the seller is a non-Jew. Yet that's the lingering impact of the Torah's commandment not to lend on interest. It is what it is. That's how the world works. And still we survive. And we flourish. We understand for ourselves. Our Torah's reason for that mitzvah of no neshekh and marbis, not to lend on interest, is so that our brother can make it without collapsing, unable to pay back. Because whereas the Goyim had debtor's prison with their crazy interest amounts, and then if you didn't pay back, they threw you in prison. No. So then what happened? So the guy owes a certain amount of francs or Deutschmarks or pound sterling, and he's in debt. His wife doesn't work, Middle Ages, and now they throw him into debtor's prison. No. So now who's going to pay it off? What do you accomplish? And now the wife and their kids end up on the street, and the whole thing is a mess. The Torah and its wisdom and compassion, you cannot lend at 20 and 30% interest. And you give a person a chance. And if he gets to the point that he cannot pay it back, the Torah has solutions, we know. And they're not lovely, but they get you out of debt. And the other side gets some recompense until Shemitah, until Yovel. And along the way, families do not end up consigned forever to poverty with no way out. It's very interesting how this all worked. The Goyim were incredibly devoutly religious back in the Middle Ages. And the story of Henry VIII is an example, and with that I close. Henry VIII, what do we know about everybody? A lot of people know about Henry VIII. He was married, and there's a story that he couldn't get a son from the first wife, and so he tried a second wife, and he couldn't get a son, and he got desperate. Nebuch, he couldn't get a son. What had happened was he was a descendant, and his family came right after a century of British war. And there were 2 houses, the Lancasters and the other ones, and there was no central authority. And finally, Henry VIII's father came in, and he created a central authority. And the idea was, we need a strong son to follow, and we will hold the central authority, and England will not go through another century of war. And for that, we need a strong boy to grow to a strong king. So Henry VIII was determined to have a son. He married the daughter, someone very, very famous, Catherine of Aragon. Aragon was some location in Spain. And it was an arranged marriage that would bring Spain and Britain together in peace. And both countries were Catholic, deeply Catholic. Henry VIII was a deep Catholic, deeply devoted, as was Spain. And now he's going to marry Catherine of Aragon, line up Spain and England. and everything's going to be hunky-dory. What happened? Catherine of Aragon, she got pregnant, miscarriage, pregnant girl, pregnant boy, died after a week, pregnant boy died of either she had miscarriages or she had boys who died in the first week, natal, and she had one girl that made it. And he decided no good. So he decided he's got to get a divorce and get another wife, that she's never going to give me a boy. But by the Catholics, they don't allow divorce. Instead, they have this kind of legal fiction that they need somebody, the Pope, to annul the marriage. Klomar, as though the marriage never happened. So if the Pope says marriage never happened, no, look, we know in Gemara, we know halacha, that there is such a thing that sometimes is a mekach ta'os. And we're not going to go into that today. But we know that in the case of a mekach ta'os, in a kedushin, we know in a certain rare situation, a marriage effectively becomes annulled. Again, we're not going to get into the details. But by the Goyim, the Catholics, it's not so simple as just a mekach ta'os. Whenever they wanted to get a divorce, and they weren't allowed to get a divorce, if they were influential enough, they went to the Pope, and they asked the Pope for a declaration of annulment, that the marriage never happened. Lo haya v'lo yiyeh. And the Pope, if they paid enough money and had enough political influence, the Pope said, lahadam, lo hayu devarim me'olam, no such marriage. So you don't need a divorce because you never got married. It's like you married lahavdil by Reform rabbi. Remember the Rav Moshe? If somebody, God forbid, couple marries by Reform rabbi, God forbid, and Rav Moshe was presented later with a question, with a situation later where a woman didn't get a get. She had a Reform marriage. Now she doesn't have a get. And then she marries, or she otherwise becomes intimate with another Jew and has a baby. Is the baby a mamzer? As the baby of a Eshes Ish? And Rav Moshe, again, we don't want to go into all the details now, but Rav Moshe held that she never was married in the first place. And he explains it, again, we don't have time for that now, but it's like the marriage never happened. Therefore, Baruch Hashem, although she had this baby out of wedlock, that's not mamzer. So in the same way, by the Goyim, if the Pope goes and calls it an annulment, so it's like he never got married. Lo haya v'lo yiyeh. And then King Henry VIII could get married to another one, and he did. And she did not give him any boys either. And the second time around, I think he just chopped her head off. That way he didn't need a divorce. Now what happened was the Pope hated Henry VIII. It was politics. It's really quite a story. Pope had his political issues with Henry VIII. So he said, I'm not going to give you a divorce. I'm not going to give you an annulment. If the Pope won't give him an annulment, he's not divorced. He's not divorced. He can't take on another woman. That would be, in their minds, adultery. Because they did not allow, let's say, polygamy, the way the Torah way back when permitted. And it certainly, in any event, wouldn't be adultery. But by them it is. If they have another woman who's, even if she's not married, but he's married to this one. So the Pope would not divorce. He's there, he's stuck. And in the first marriage, he didn't want to chop her head off. So he came up with an idea. It's quite a story. It's quite a story. Actually, his first wife, Catherine of Aragon, before she married him, was originally married off by her parents to his older brother. Spain wanted to deal with England. They wanted shalom. And so they gave their daughter, Catherine of Aragon, to marry the King of England, who was the older brother of Henry VIII. But the older brother died young before he ever had children. So what became of Catherine of Aragon? So they married her off to the younger brother, Henry VIII. Now Henry VIII wants to get rid of her. And Henry VIII is stuck with the Bible. And in those days, they took the so-called Old Testament much more seriously than they do now. And since the Pope would not give him a divorce and annulment, and since his Christian belief he cannot get divorced, he somehow had to get the marriage to Catherine nullified. So his shita was, looking at the Bible, the Old Testament, his shita was, you're not allowed to marry your brother's wife. You're not allowed to be intimate with your brother's wife, right? Vayikra yitches. Not allowed to be married, intimate with your brother's wife. It's Parashat. It's the whole parak yitches. The one with the homosexuals are not allowed to be together. And you're not allowed to be together with animals. Not allowed to marry your brother's wife. Be intimate with her. So he came and he argued under Vayikra. It's quite a thing. Catholic king arguing to the Pope and everyone else, citing Vayikra. Yudches. I never got married to her properly because I married the wife of my brother. Therefore, I don't need a divorce because I was never Nosui. And the Pope came back teaching him. It's extraordinary stuff to read this. Pope starts quoting in Devarim Hilchos Yibum. Says it's true, you're not allowed to marry your brother's wife, but you married her after your brother died. And according to the Old Testament, you're allowed to, you even should marry the wife of your deceased brother if no kids came out of it, no boys came out of it. So Adarabba, instead of arguing that you weren't allowed to marry your deceased brother's wife because of Vayikra Yitches, you were chayav to marry her. And the Shwanted Chalitza, it's crazy. This went on with the Catholics arguing under Devarim Vayibim. So he actually, Henry VIII, decided he needed that the Pope is too biblically knowledgeable for me. His mom is true. And so he decided, I need a rabbi. I need a Gadol Hadar. I need a real posek. Mamish Rav. So he decided, I need the greatest posek in England. And then they gave him the bad news. Reb Henry VIII, there is no posek in England because in the year 1290, we expelled all the Jews from England and there are no Jews here. So there are no poskim here. There's no chief rabbi of England. There's no nothing. So you have to find a posek in Italy. And the posek said, what can I tell you? Under the Old Testament, you were allowed to marry Catherine, the widow of your older brother. What can I tell you? You had a choice, Chalitza, but you had a choice of Yibam. So what did Henry do? He said, I gotta get rid of her because she's not giving me boys. And if the Pope won't annul the marriage and he won't hold its Vayikra Yitches, and if the rabbi in Italy won't hold its Vayikra Yitches, and I'm stuck with this religion that holds by chapter 5 in the book of Matthew, their Bible, that I'm not allowed to get a divorce, Henry decided, that's it. I quit Catholicism, and I'm starting a new religion. And he called it Anglicanism. In England, it's Anglicanism. That's the religion of the Archbishop of Canterbury. And in the United States, when they brought, after all, we started off with the 13 colonies. Most were British, except for New Amsterdam, which initially was Dutch and then became English also. But initially, we were mostly British. So in the United States, so they brought the British religion with them, Anglicanism, but they were breaking away from England. So they didn't want to call it Anglicanism because they hated England and Anglican England. So they renamed it Episcopalianism. It's a longer word, but so the Episcopals are the Anglicans, same religion. And that religion is similar to Catholicism, but it's not the same religion. It's a Protestant religion. And that way, Henry said, I don't need a divorce. I'm not a Catholic. I'm an Anglican. We don't need divorces in my religion. And he divorced the wife, married the next one whose head he eventually chopped off. And his story goes on and on. Why am I bringing this all up? To share with you that here we have in Parashat the halachas of Neshekh and Marbis. And who would imagine, looking at this week's Parsha, the impact that Neshekh and Marbis and that law would have on the unfolding of 500 years of Jewish history, that they would tag us as moneylenders, Shylock, and all the things they put us through. To this day, they associate Jews with money. As I said, they have big sales in Montana and in Kentucky, Alabama, West Virginia, where there are no Jews. And yet they have the chutzpah to associate Jews with money. Tafka, the Jews, they'll do anything for money, as if Goyim wouldn't do the same thing, as if Goyim don't get up online 6 hours on Friday after Thanksgiving to save $1, as if Goyim don't dicker for 2 hours when they buy a car, just to make $1 here and there. So I point out also with this wedding business how, in the same way, from time to time, our Torah, which they call the Old Testament, a lot of our Torah they lived by, and with all due respect, they made a mess of it. Without Torah Sheb'al Peh, and you have only Torah Sheb'Chtav, and you don't have Torah Sheb'al Peh. So we have Torah Sheb'al Peh. They don't have Torah Sheb'al Peh. So when they see an eye for an eye, they don't know. They don't know Baba Kama. So what do they know? Have they ever opened up Baba Kama? Daf Pei Vav, Pei Zion? Have they looked? They don't know. They don't know. They take a look at things. They see that on Sukkot you're supposed to take hold of a goodly fruit, pre-Eitz Hadar. They don't know what that means. Where does that say Esrog? Pre-Eitz Hadar. There's so many different possibilities to even translate. Hadar could mean like a beautiful bekovidik fruit, or it could mean dar, that resides, a tree, a fruit that resides a long time on a tree. You know, the Gemara talks about what pre-Eitz Hadar is before they come up with Esrog. So if you're just going by Torah Sheb'Chtav without Torah Sheb'al Peh, you don't know what's going on. And so that's how it ended up with Neshekh and Marbis. That's how it ended up with the other footnote before I break. It's quite a footnote. Two of the worst villains, evil, cruel Satans in medieval European Christianity, in their dealings with the Jews, were Queen Isabella and Ferdinand the King of Spain. They are the ones who imposed the Spanish Inquisition and ultimately expelled Spanish Jewry, the Jews of Sfarad, Sephardic Jewry, in 1492. Talk about Tisha B'Av 1492, August 2nd, 1492, same day that by HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Chastei Hashem, that Columbus set sail for India and ended up discovering New Haven, the place that would become the haven for the Jews, of so many Jews who fled, although actually mostly originally the haven for Ashkenazic Jewry, whereas the Sephardim ended up in North Africa by the Arabs. Another story, which was also part of Chastei Hashem, because therefore in 1947, 48, early 50s, when Eretz Yisrael was coming about and it was underpopulated and the Arabs were trying to kill everybody, the Arabs threw out 900,000 Jews from their countries, threw them into Israel. And so overnight, Eretz Yisrael was populated by 1 million Jews, because the Arabs threw them out, because they were there, also thanks to Spain. But here's the one that's like a mind blower. Ferdinand and Isabella. Why did they do the Inquisition? Why did they expel the Jews? They wanted to destroy the influence of Judaism in the world so that they could turn the entire world into pure Catholic. They were Catholic purists. They allied with England because it was Catholic. All of Europe was Catholic at the time. France still is, Italy, Portugal, so much of Europe, even today, but certainly then. Like the only ones that weren't were like Germany with Martin Luther, and was it Switzerland that had John Calvin, whatever. Imagine their game was get rid of the Jews and the whole world will be Catholic. And since we, the Spanish and Portuguese, are leaders in traveling to the New World, all the early, like Portugal with Prince Henry the Navigator, they sponsored Columbus. And we could just go on and on. Many of you maybe learned in high school, elementary school, the names of all these people, Magellan, Verrazano, who knows, all these Spanish and Portuguese explorers. And the idea was Cortez, they were going to bring all of Catholicism to the New World. That was the plan. Spain under Isabella and Ferdinand. And what did HaKadosh Baruch Hu do? Ultimately, the great conqueror and imperial settler of the New World was Great Britain. In the end, it was not Spain. Spain they expelled us in 1492. Portugal expelled us in 1497. Less than a century later, the Spanish Armada lost in 1588 to the British, and Spain lost its influence, and Britain became the great power that spread Christianity all over the world, to the degree that England ended up with so much land everywhere, not only in the New World, but India, Australia, everywhere, New Zealand, that it was said that sun never sets on British soil. Here's what HaKadosh Baruch Hu did. Have you picked it up already? Ferdinand and Isabella, who aimed to destroy the Jewish people in order to make the whole world Catholic, HaKadosh Baruch Hu made it that their daughter, Catherine of Aragon, was not able to have a boy for Henry VIII, which led Henry VIII to abandon Catholicism, form his own religion, make England that Anglican religion. Thus, England ended up spreading all over the world Protestantism, not Catholicism. And all of Christianity ended up split to this day. There is no dominance anywhere in the world, because as much Catholic dominance as there is in South America and in much of Europe, the British are Protestants, and the Germans, or whatever they are, other Protestant countries. The United States is Protestant, Canada, Britain did it. Britain brought it to Australia and New Zealand, and they brought it to South Africa, and there's a complete rift. And instead of the world becoming purely Catholic, there's a new pope now. Only half of the world is under his religious guidance. Chasdei Hashem. Those who aimed to destroy us in order to conquer the world, Kadosh Baruch Hu had a different plan. And it was from their own loins that their daughter, her inability to have a boy, his insistence on getting rid of her, that religion not allowing him to do it, his breaking and forming a new religion that later got spread all over the world, it all started because the daughter of Ferdinand and Isabella. The tragedy for Catholicism came from the ones who tried to destroy the Jews. And meantime, we ended up in the United States, in Eretz Israel, in Arab countries that for many centuries treated us very well. And we were able to build and rebuild Torah all over the world. Thank you very much for sharing with me a few moments to learned some of what I had to share with you. Shabbat Shalom. Good Shabbos.